So during this war, as we know, the full-scale war, it's now been going on for 2.5 years, basically. Ukraine is losing a lot of its people, refugees, people are fleeing, people are dying in the war. A lot of people remain in occupied territories. So some people fear that Ukraine might lose its identity in this war, such as, Russians are trying to take away the culture, the language, and everything that makes Ukraine and its history. And so I was wondering, so some people might see this as, view what Russians are doing to Ukrainians as genocide. And in America, we had an action summit that took place in Washington at the end of September. And they were asking congressmen whether Russians' attacks on Ukraine should be recognized as genocide. And I was wondering, do you believe this? And are there enough facts to justify this legal status for Russia's war against Ukraine?
This war has a clearly genocidal character. Putin openly says that there is no Ukrainian nation, there is no Ukrainian language, there is no Ukrainian culture. Russian propagandists interpret this in Russian TV that Ukrainians have to be either re-educated as Russians or killed. And for 10 years, we have been documenting, as a human rights defenders, how these words converted in horrible practice. When the Russian troops physically exterminated active local people on the ground, like mayors, journalists, priests, civil writers, like artists, musicians, teachers, environmentalists, any active people of community, how they banned Ukrainian language and culture and robbed and destroyed Ukrainian cultural heritage, how they forcibly taken Ukrainian children to Russia, put them in Russian re-education camps where they were told that they are not Ukrainian children, they are Russian children, that their parents refused from them, and they will be supposed to be adopted by Russian families who have to bring them up as Russians. So we have no option. If we stop fighting, it will be no more us. Because in this war, we are fighting for a freedom in all senses. For a freedom to be an independent country, but not Russian colony. For a freedom to preserve our Ukrainian identity and not to be forced to re-educate our children as Russians. And for a freedom to have our democratic choice, like a chance to build a country where the rights of everybody are protected.
So I was wondering, I know a lot of people might not agree with that, but I do agree with it about genocide. And I was wondering, what do you think needs to be done to make other people recognize this as genocide?
As a lawyer, I know that genocide is a crime of crimes. It's very difficult to prove genocidal intent in international court, and there is some restrictions in UN Convention Against Genocide. But let's look to the situation through the lens of the common sense. There is no necessity to be a lawyer to understand a simple thing. If you want partially or completely liquidate some national group, there is no necessity for you to kill all representatives. You can just forcibly change their identity, and sooner or later, entire national group will disappear, and you will reach your genocidal intent.
So I know that you're involved with documenting war crimes, and I was wondering, why do you think it's important to talk about justice and punishment for those who have committed war crimes?
Let's look to the situation from the historical perspective. Russian troops commit horrible war crimes, not just in Ukraine. They commit horrible war crimes in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Libya, in Syria, in other countries of the world. They have never been punished. Russians believe they can do whatever they want. This means that if we want to get sustainable peace, we must break the circle of impunity. We must make Russians accountable, because justice is precondition to peace in our part of the world, where Russia for decades used the war as a tool how to achieve its geopolitical interests, and for decades uses war crimes as the method how to win the war.
So I was wondering, so today I was having a conversation about actually how a lot of Georgians might support Russia. Why do you think that is when they've committed war crimes in Georgia? Like, because you mentioned that just now. Why do you think a lot of people are supporting Russia in these areas?
I think that situation is much more complicated because the war has not just military, but also other dimensions like informational dimension, economic dimension, digital dimension, cultural dimension, value dimension. And Russia is very good in informational dimension of the war. This dimension, it's a war for hearts and minds of people. And Russia very effectively create fake reality and try to impose that. And what doesn't mean that you live and perceive the fake. It means that you make the wrong decision and wrong pattern of behavior.
I actually lost my cousin in this war. He was in the 3rd Brigade, and he fought in Avdiivka. When he went to go fight, none of us really understood because he didn't get called in. He went himself. And so I was just wondering, why do you think people, and I understand it now after I went and I saw the entire villages destroyed and I heard people's stories, and it changed my brain chemistry a lot. And it also changed the way, because I was really mad at him when he went. So I was just wondering, why do you think people continue to fight? But as well, what do you think keeps frontline soldiers to keep going, especially with all the conditions and, you know, the way the war is going in some places? What do you think is keeping them motivated and being out in trenches and fighting and not having much food and being injured? And what do you think makes them continue going like that?
First of all, I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
And thank you, your cousin, for defending me personally.
Thank you.
Yes, you are right. We have a civilian army. What do I mean? Majority of our soldiers are former civilians, designers, hairdressers, like taxi drivers, journalists, children writers, teachers, steel workers, farmers, like different kinds of professions. But these people had to stop this peaceful work and decided to join Ukrainian army in order to protect and to defend the peaceful democratic future for other people, for themselves, and for their own children. And this is a huge tragedy because it's not us who choose this war. Russia has launched it, and just in order to survive, we have to start to defend our country, our freedom, our human dignity, and our democratic choice. And I have no simple answer to your very difficult questions. I just remember my friend and colleague Andriana Susak. When large-scale war started, she left her 6-year-old son and told me that I have to fight for my son's future. It's my obligation. So probably, if I may, to answer to this question properly, I will say that these dramatic times provide people an opportunity to express the best in us, to be courageous, to fight for freedom, to take burden of responsibility, to make difficult but right choices, and to help each other. Because only when we help in each other, only when we rescue our life for others, people whom we never met before, only in this moment we are acutely aware what does it mean to be human.
I really like that response. That's a good way to look at it as well. So, as someone who leads the Center of Civil Liberties for Ukraine, I was wondering, can you explain what it would mean for Ukraine to be a democracy in a modern Ukrainian world? Does that make sense?
10 years ago, just 10 years ago, millions of Ukrainians stood up their voice against pro-Russian corrupt authoritarian regime. And they peacefully demonstrated, just for a chance, to build a country where government is accountable, judiciary is independent, and police do not beat students who are peacefully demonstrating. And we paid a very high price for this chance, because more than 100 peaceful protesters was gunned down in the center of the city. And when we got this chance to build a country where the rights of everybody are protected, like a chance, not just immediate result, like a chance to work and to build it, in order to stop us on this way, Russia invaded. Russia occupied Crimea, part of eastern regions of Ukraine, and 2 years ago extended this war to the large-scale invasion. Because Putin is not afraid of NATO. Ukraine, on the moment of the war, was a country which decided to be neutral, not to join to any bloc. So Ukraine has a zero chance to join NATO. But Ukraine has chance to make democratic transition, and Putin, as every dictator in the world, he's afraid of the idea of freedom. And that's why for Ukrainian people to become a real, developed democracy, it's very important, because we are paying the highest price just for a chance to make democratic transition and to build such a country.
I agree with that. Especially that's why South Koreans are joining in too, because of their leader, Kim Jong-un. Both just leave this out. The trash cans of countries have all joined together.
Yes, Russia has their allies like North Korea, Iran, China, Syria, and sometimes I have feeling that we are dealing with the entire authoritarian bloc.
How do you feel about, this is off the thing too, how do you feel about too, because with China being involved with a lot of stuff, for drones, a lot of people need parts from China. How do you feel about that right now? Do you think we should steer away from China and try to get parts from elsewhere? Or?
I think that this involvement of China in other countries in different way, it shows us two important things. But first, let me describe what's going on. I live in Kiev, and my native city is constantly being shelled not just by Russian rockets, but also by Iranian drones. China helps Russia to see common sanctions and import technologies critical to warfare. North Korea sent to Russia more than 1 million artillery shells and now troops. And Syria votes for Russia in UN General Assembly. So first thing, all these regimes have something in common. They have the same idea what a human being is. They have the same idea how the world has looked like. So they are fighting and supporting each other to impose their vision to entire international community. And second, in this regard, Ukraine not just a goal, Ukraine is a tool how to break international order. And that is why it's not just a war between two states. This is a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy. And that is why he will not be able to stop Putin in Ukraine. He will go further. And this will encourage other authoritarian leaders like China in different parts of the globe to do the same.
Yeah, and end up banding together, and then we're all going to end up in World War III. Yeah, I agree with that completely and utterly. So I've heard a lot of Ukrainians, I've heard from some Ukrainians that the reason they do fight is to go back to being the modern democracy. And do you think this is why they continue to fight as well?
Sure, but I think that it's also very important to highlight that it's also about human dignity. Because I remember my feeling when large-scale war started. I feel anger. I was so angry because, like, I asked, we are paid such huge price just to get a chance to make democratic reform. And we are planning hardly work to build sustainable democratic institutions. And we know that it's difficult to make even during peaceful time. It's extremely difficult to make during the time of war, but still we have a chance to fight for future, which we want for us and for our children. And how Russia can decide that we have no such chance. I was very angry. And I think that it's also something about human dignity. That, like, we have human dignity. We are not slavers. It's us who have to decide our future, not Russia.
Yeah, one thing I noticed about when I was traveling to all the different cities and towns, it was just remarkable. The people still smiling and saying, "Yeah, we're not going to leave." They said, "Fuck the Russians. This is our home, and this is where we belong, and we're not going to give up." And it's just incredible. And
I think it's also act of resistance. Mm-hmm. When you live in constant pain, because Russia inflicting the immense pain on civilians, it's a way how Russia tried to win this war. Russia tries to break people's resistance and occupy the country by using a tool which I call the immense pain on civilian population. And we only for these 2.5 years documented more than 80,000 episodes of war crimes, like different kinds. Russia deliberately shelling residential buildings, schools, churches, museums, hospitals. Russia attack evacuation corridors. Russia torturing people in filtration camps. Russia taking Ukrainian children to Russia. Russians abducting, raping, killing, and robbing civilians in occupied territories. So in these circumstances, smile is an act of resistance. You know what? My friend told me once that Russians came to take off everything which we love. Our freedom, our country, our future, our children, our joy. And I decided, don't provide them such a chance.
So I know you document war crimes, but one of my biggest questions that I think I've noticed, and especially with all the stories and people I've talked to over the time, I feel like a lot of it's not being put in the news. Do you think it would make a difference if this stuff was in the news and talking about the torture chambers and the kids and what they're actually doing? Because I feel like the news and politicians, they try to walk around it and don't actually have it out there. There's a lot of information, especially being in the US, that I've never even heard of until I actually saw it and got the stories for myself. And I'm just baffled that it's not being told. So how do you feel about that? Do you think that would make a difference if people heard these stories and more people would help out?
I think it will a huge difference. Let me tell you one thing. When Russians tried to circle Kyiv, I was in the city. I refused to evacuate. And with a part of my team, we stayed and we continue our work. And that's why when Ukrainian army pushed the Russian army from Kyiv region, we immediately was able to send our mobile groups to Bucha, Irpin, Matyzhin, Vorzel, and other cities and settlements of Kyiv region. And we found dead bodies of civilians, men and women, who lay scattered around the streets until their liberation. We found dead bodies of civilians in the gardens of their own households. We found dead bodies of civilians in mass graves with their hands tied under their back. We found dead bodies of civilians and children. The whole families were killed in civilian cars while they tried to escape from the dangerous zone. So I asked to myself, if Russians committed this horror when the whole world was watching, what the hell is waiting for us if we lose this attention. And why attention matter? Because when this information from Bucha appeared in media in different countries, it were ordinary people who start to make pressure to their own government to stop Russian atrocities. And I will use this opportunity to say my sincere gratitude to these ordinary people in different countries of the world. We survived because of you, because you don't leave us alone, because you urge your government to provide Ukraine with weapons to be able to defend ourselves.
Yeah. Weapons are a big thing, and I think a lot of people don't like to talk about lethal weapons, and they want to talk about the non-lethal ones, but the thing is, the only thing that's going to really help us get there and win this war are the lethal weapons, are the people that are hearing these atrocities and saying, what are we going to do? How are we going to end this? And so I think that's why it's so important that I think a lot of these stories that are not being told really do need to be told.
I can tell my example. I'm a human rights lawyer, and I have been applying the law to defend people and human dignity for many years. But now I have no legal instruments how to stop Russian atrocities. In 2022, UN Court of Justice made a decision and obliged Russia to withdraw their troops of Ukraine. Russia ignored even decision of UN Court of Justice. So what can I do? I can't wave Geneva or Hague conventions in the front of Russian tanks. The Russian tanks will not stop.
In your opinion, are there any reliable institutions for Ukrainian people? Like, who can Ukrainian people trust today here?
I know from my own experience that when you can't rely on the legal instruments, you can still rely on people. Because we get used to thinking in categories of states and interstate organizations, but ordinary people have a much greater impact than they can even imagine. Let's return to the start of large-scale war. That time, not just Putin, but also our international partners were confident that Ukraine will fall just in 3 or 4 days, because Russia is so enormous opposing power. And that is why I saw how international organizations, even international humanitarian organizations, evacuated their personnel. They leave us alone. But ordinary people remained. And it were ordinary people who took people out from the ruined cities. It were ordinary people who organized evacuations from the siege cities and settlements under Russian artillery's fire. It were ordinary people who broke through the encirclement to provide humanitarian aid. And suddenly it became obvious for Russia and for the entire world that ordinary people fighting for their freedom is much more powerful than even the second army in the world.
As a human rights defender, what are the main challenges you see right now with democracy and human rights in your country today?
The war is a poison. The war is a poison because war has its own logic, and this logic is opposite to the logic of democracy. The logic of the war dictates centralization. The logic of democracy dictates decentralization. The logic of the war dictates limitation of human rights and freedoms due to security requirements. For example, we have curfew in the city, even being far away from front line, we still have curfew. Logic of the democratization dictates that you have to expand the space for rights and freedom. So it's two different trends, it's two different logics, and we are stuck between these two logics, and we have to balance. We have to reach both goals parallel, to defend our country and to implement our democratic choice, because we have no luxury to postpone democratization after the war period. Frankly speaking, we have no idea. Either we are in the end of this war, in the middle of this war, or just in the beginning of this war. So we have to do democratic reforms during the large-scale war. It's extremely difficult. We have to defend freedom of speech while we have and this is a real necessary military censorship. We have to defend local democracy when the logic of the war dictates centralization. So it's difficult, but we're on the right track. And that is why Russia started large-scale war, because Russia understood 2 years ago that it will lose Ukraine.
How do you think the full-scale war has impacted basic human rights of people in Ukraine? Except because you have the curfew, and you have also people that even if they don't want to go to war, they have to go. And I know that there's those kinds of things, but is there anything else you could think of?
A lot of challenges. A lot of challenges. Like even in way of thinking, because people start to think about survival issues. Because you can't find any safe place anymore in the whole country where you can hide from Russian rockets. And this changes your way of thinking, for sure. But what made me optimistic, regardless of this challenge, is one thing. I know that if you open any survey about value of people in Ukraine, Ukrainians always put freedom on the first place in the hierarchy of values.
So obviously, I have my opinions on how the international community can better help Ukraine. I especially think with the United States, we need to send more artillery, more drones, more help over here. I don't think we are giving enough. But in your opinion, how do you think others can help Ukraine, and protect civilians in Ukraine and citizens, and just how to help stop the aggression and stop this war?
A lot of can be done, because democratic countries are much more powerful than Russia and its authoritarian allies. But I will not name these concrete steps. I will start with something else. First, we have to set a common goal. What do I mean? When large-scale war started, democratic countries told, let's help Ukraine not to fail. And Ukraine obtained the first weapons to be able to defend ourselves. And first real sanctions against Russia were introduced into force. And once again, I will repeat that we are extremely grateful because it helps us to survive. But this is also an explanation by why Ukraine was waiting for a first modern tank for more than a year. And this delay and political debate around this issue resulted in numerous deaths. Why Ukraine was waiting for a first modern plane for more than 2 years. Yeah. And this debate, once again, caused numerous deaths, because each day of delay resulted in deaths of Ukrainian people. And we have to change this narrative to another one. Let's help Ukraine to win. Because there is huge difference between these two narratives. Let's help Ukraine not to fail, and let's help Ukraine to win. And we can practically measure these differences in types of weapons, in speed of decisions, in gravity of sanctions. We are fighting not just for ourselves. If we not be able to stop Putin in Ukraine, he will go further, because Russia is empire, and empire has a center but has no borders. People who survived Russian captivity told us that Russians express their visions like this: at first, we'll occupy Ukraine, and then, together with you, we will go to conquer in other countries. And the process of forcible mobilizations of Ukrainians to Russian army all these years is going on in occupied territories. They publicly discussed on Russian TV which next country they will attack, Poland or Estonia. So, with the worst scenario, even people from United States will have to send their troops to Europe to stop Russian empire.
That's what I've been thinking and saying as well. You know, I think when I was talking to my cousin's best friend who went with him, he said the biggest issue was the U.S. talking and holding up the funding bill to send here for weapons. So when they were trapped in Avdiivka, they didn't have anything.
Yes, they didn't have anything.
It's just people just keep talking instead of actually doing anything. That's a really big problem. And let's try and change. So to end this, I know there's not like a direct translation of the word "wella" here, but I know that means a great deal to Ukrainian people. And I was wondering, how would you describe that word to others that would try to understand what it means and what the context is for you guys and how powerful that word is here?
It's very difficult to explain, but I will try. I will try to explain this with something which I see in developed democracies. Because people who for decades live in stable, peaceful countries, they started to take human rights and security for granted. Because they inherited democracy from their parents. They have never fought for democracy. They never give their blood for voля. They perceive freedom as a possibility to make a choice between different cheeses in supermarket. And that is why they don't want to step from the zone of their own comfort to defend freedom and democracy. But the truth is that freedom is very fragile. You can't attain human rights and security once and forever. We every day make our choice. And Ukrainians decide that regardless of everything which is going on, the story of Ukraine, it's a life-affirming story, because dramatic times raise hope. And we still have the chance to fight for freedom. And this is a huge luxury, to have a chance in our life where you have no guarantees.
In your opinion, what could America or the world do better for Ukraine to help end this war?
The truth answer is that we need your help. Because we are fighting not just for ourselves, we are fighting for the world order which was established after the Second World War, which means that our fight is preventing the third one. Because countries of Europe are safe only because Ukrainians are still fighting. Because you can't build a paradise, even being an island, when the part of another world is bleeding. And you can do a lot. I always think that I have no right to tell someone what they have to do, but because people know better. But there are hundreds of methods what has to be done in this situation, being like ordinary responsible citizens. People can write about Ukraine, people can organize demonstrations to urge the government to do more. People can gather donations to send humanitarian support. People can build horizontal ties between people in Ukraine and try to help them just from human solidarity. The truth is that we need it. I will tell you one story. In one public audience, people ask me what we can do more. And I know a person who asked this question, and I know that this person have already done a lot. And I start to think, but why he asked me what he can do being so active? And I understood that he asked me another question. He asked me how I can stop this war. Because when we face with such enormous challenge, all our efforts may seem senseless because you can't stop the war with all your efforts. But the truth is that there is no modest efforts. There is no senseless efforts. All efforts matter. We need it in this war. Because we are not gods, we are human beings. And probably with our individual effort, I can't change this war. But without my individual efforts, nothing will be changed.
I want to say thank you for talking to me.
Дякую.
And дякую.
Дякую.
And I really do appreciate you taking your time out of your day. And I know some of these things are very hard to talk about, but it's important. And I'm very happy with your responses, and that they were great. And I could actually tell that it was actually genuine. And that's the most important part.
Thank you for doing all this stuff. It's important. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.